How are you?
All right.
Well, thank you for coming along to meet with us. Everybody, I'd like you to meet Denise. Some of you will probably know her already. Leadership coach, supporting a wide range of people in different managerial positions, whether that's stepping up or enhancing what they do. Normally, you focus, would it be correct to say, on people that are facing some sort of uncertainty or change? And that was one of the reasons why we both started chatting with each other, is we've seen a few people that, and have been referring a few people between us who have been, unfortunately, their positions have been made redundant.
Yeah.
And this is where you have came in, and how we met each other, I think back in
Yeah.
COVID, it was the time we met each other, Denise. So it'd be great for you probably to describe, what you do for people that come and meet you for the first time, and maybe what feelings you think that they show.
Yeah. And thanks for this opportunity, really. And I think we've had lots of conversations, haven't we? And I think what we've noticed is there's quite a lot of redundancy around at the moment. So I think that seems a little bit of a hot topic. But generally, so I would work with someone who's in some sort of a transition. Um, they're not necessarily in a difficult place. They just need a bit of safe space and thinking time, really, to kind of work out what their what next is. But I think when it comes to things like redundancy, very often when we've had a setback, then there's some very strong emotions that come with that. So everybody's really different. So I kind of meet people where they are.
Okay.
Some people come really emotional, angry. Some people are really relieved because they're delighted to
Okay.
have, to have left their place. But then sometimes then the reality kicks in then, and it's kind of like, right, what next? So and I think you entitled our little chat, "What next?" So I suppose that is what I do, is like come along and get people to do their best thinking because they generally have the answers.
Okay.
Um, Sometimes they just have a lot of barriers to get there. So my job is really to give them I call it a bunk up over the barriers. And yeah, they're the expert. I kind of ask a lot of questions. So
Okay. And what would you say, if somebody maybe comes to you and says, look, I'm not sure what I want to do next. I've been doing, X for a number of years. And I recognize some people see it as you know, being very positive, and they can go, right, this is a new opportunity for me. How can I explore this further? But equally, if depending on your circumstances, you can be, oh my goodness, I need a job right now. How do you help people shift to the next phase?
that's a great question. I think you have to meet people where they are, and I think you've hit the nail on the head because some people just want to get a job, um, and that's absolutely fine because actually there's some practicalities because I think when it comes to a transition or a redundancy or looking for a new job, then it's not just you that's impacted. So if you've got family, partner, friends, there's like a ripple effect. So I think the first thing that I do is kind of get people really clear about what do they want to be different and actually where are they now?
Okay.
How do they feel? Okay, so we do the feeling word. How are they feeling about where they are now? What do they think they might like to do? And I think I've got a couple of questions, which is like there's one question that you ask and they go right to the answer. I say, what would you tell your best friend to do in this situation? And then they give you the answer and then they give you a list of reasons why they can't do it. So I kind of go, okay, right, we know what the challenge is now. So I think there's a mix of meeting people where they are, and then there's some very practical things around exploring. So I've got a couple of tools that I use, and we do a bit of a reflection on how have they got to here. So if
Okay.
you look in your career in the past, what are your highlights? What was going on for you? Where were the low points and what was going on? And actually, how did you get yourself from a low point to a high point? Because
Okay.
I think, and we've had conversations about this before, is that people very often don't recognize what their transferable skills are. So I think sometimes by doing that, it's just trying to build the confidence and then explore some different options. So what have you already thought about? What might get in the way? So lots of questions, lots of curiosity. And what you see then is them starting to think really about that. But then there's some practical things, and I think that's where we've worked really well together, because I think once I've helped them establish maybe a little bit of direction and some transferable skills, you do your magic. You and your team do your magic on kind of making that kind of the practical, the CV, the LinkedIn, and all that sort of stuff. So people start to, it's small steps, Emma, isn't it? It's those tiny, tiny steps that sometimes we might be in a hole and we can't really see the way out. And it's always about like, what's the plan and what's the next step forward, and how we can do that, really. So
okay. And how often do you meet with your clients, and how long are your sessions, and is there a particular length of time you work with someone, or is it all just dependent?
Great question again. All dependent. I kind of have, it's very much led by the person. So if we're typically working on, I don't know, someone's turned up, they've been made redundant, they're trying to look at for the next job, we might meet every 3 to 4 weeks. We might meet every couple of weeks. There's always homework in between the sessions. Okay. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but you do get homework. And actually, my role as a coach is to help someone move forward. I say you're helping, I'm trying to help you change and move forward, rather than, we have a chat, obviously, but it's a bit more than that. So at the end of each session, and they're about 60 minutes, 75 minutes, something like that. So we get really clear about what you want to work on this session, where are you now, and what you're going to do between now and when I speak to you next. So typically they will come back and say, I reached out to 3 people in my network. I did my strengths profile. I updated something on LinkedIn. I applied for a job. I did some research on that. And then I can hear that they're moving forward. And then typically I would be expecting someone to be making some shifts after 2 to 3 sessions. If they're not, something else is going on. So we need to pause it. But I tend to work with people for no more than 6 sessions on something like this, because by that time they might not have found the perfect job, but they've certainly got the confidence and feel like they've had some support to kind of move forward. And we've gone on that first main barrier. So
and when you said about the strengths profile, what, I think a lot of people, from my experience, I actually speaking to somebody earlier, they'd maybe, they've been not looking for work for a while. There's still lots of different things they can do, and now hopefully they could, potentially someone may come and hopefully gain a fresh perspective from someone like yourself. And I think when you have been out of work for a while, a lot of people do start, the confidence does diminish a little bit, and it's quite hard to keep the upbeat. What does the strengths profile look like? What do they do? Like, what's that exercise look like?
Okay, there's a couple of strengths profiles in the market, and the one I use is strengths profile. It's probably one of the most comprehensive, so it rates you against 60 strengths. And I think it's quite interesting when it comes to strengths, because people think it's something they're good at, but it's a bit more than that. So the profile I use helps people identify what am I good at, but actually what gives me energy. So we can do things that we're really good at, but we've learnt to do them. So we can do them. So in my world, I'm not great with like the finite detail, but I've learnt to do that. So if I'm reading a document, I can do it really well, but it drains me. So it gives people an idea of what they're actually using. I think what I like about this tool in particular, it's a couple of things. One, it gives them the strengths they're not using. So particularly when we feel that dip or this is really hard, I think we need to acknowledge that. And so what support do you need while you're in that dip? Sometimes that might just be a conversation, but also looking at what they call it unrealized strengths. So where's your potential here? I also think when it gets to interviews or helping people feel more confident, it gives them a great narrative to describe themselves. Because particularly if you're transferring, and I know you do lots of work with people who are going from one sector to doing something totally different, is actually it's not just about the experience, because sometimes that might not be relevant.
Okay.
It's actually the skills and strengths that they've got that they're bringing. So they're able to articulate themselves in a different way to an employer, which
Yes.
then builds their confidence over, well, it's okay that you haven't had, you haven't got a marketing degree, but actually you've got this set of, you can connect with people and you've got great communication skills and you're great at managing your time and blah, blah, blah. So I think, and actually I see, again, it's that building blocks of confidence, isn't it, that they can kind of then put into place. So yeah, I've been using it for about pretty much since I started my coaching journey about 15 years ago. And it's in the tool bag, So should we do a strengths profile? So it just gives you more information about yourself.
Yes.
And again, builds that confidence. So
And I like that way that you said that a lot of people, particularly women as well, will look at a job description and say, oh, but I can't do that one part or those two parts, and they're completely put off applying.
yeah,
And like you said, if you've done the strengths profile, they can now find ways to address that and say how they're, going to combat that. So it helps, I suppose, build up their resilience and their comebacks with what they're going to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I was on a local train some months back, and I overheard two women having a conversation, and it was so packed, the train. And the conversation went something like this: I've seen this job, but I can only probably do about 85% of it. And I was thinking, I need to speak to that woman. But the train pulled into the station and she got off, and I put something out. I think I put something out on LinkedIn or Twitter saying there's a woman in the Merseyside area walking around thinking about applying for a job. Whoever she is, she needs to apply because she's only got 85% of it. And so it was just a bit of fun, but it's great. That's what we do, isn't it? We look and go, oh, which are the bits that we can't do? And secretly men do that too, but they don't admit it.
Yes.
So, yeah.
No, absolutely. And is there any other tools that you do use for people before they, not necessarily before they start applying for work, but before they feel confident in how they're going to tackle the job market?
Yeah, I think that it's about having a plan, and what's worked in the past is a great question. So particularly, most people have got a job from the past. What did they to do then? I think there's also something about getting really clear about what your values are and what's important, because I think when you're going through a transition, it's a great time to kind of look at that. So that is another thing that I use, but I think everybody's really different. So different things apply to different people, but things like strengths profile, I do, and that career lifeline, looking at that, they are the kind of memento. The other one that I use, and this is kind of across the board, it doesn't just relate to that, is that managing time and staying on focus. So I've got something called the urgent important grid. What do you do when everything's urgent? And I think that is probably one of my go-to coaching tools, because I think in our world today we just get so much overwhelm. And I know when we talked the other week, we talked about another phenomenon called survivor syndrome.
Yes.
Which is when people we talk about very much about people made redundant, but there are people that survive the redundancy and the impact of that. And sometimes I think those organisations which are kind of quite switched on, I'll very often get called in to work with the people who've been left, because they also go through their own set of emotions. It might be relief to start with, and then actually they realise that actually the workload of the person that used to sit next to them is now with them.
Okay.
And so there's a whole load of processing. What do they need to do? And it's quite interesting what happens in their transition. So those organisations that support the people have far better outcomes than those who kind of just go, well, crack the whip and let's get on. So,
yeah, totally. And I think the way people normally look at when they talk about redundancy. They think, and sometimes it is whole teams or whole organizations, but quite a lot of the time it can be restructuring, and
Yes.
there is a lot of the team left behind as well. And yes, of course, you've got that initial reaction of, oh, relief, thank goodness I've kept my role, but then you've got the survivor's guilt, as you
Yeah.
call it, afterwards. So yeah, there's
Yeah.
definitely two ways to look at it. What about then when someone's ready to tackle the job market? What's your advice to them? Like, what's practical and mindset wise is probably the trickiest one to keep on top of, I would say.
Yeah, so there's a great little, I think we get to choose our mindset. So I hear things like this is going to be really hard. It's going to be, I won't be able to do this. And I'm thinking, well, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you can think like that, or you can choose a different reaction. And I think there's the kind of realistic one is what would be a more helpful mindset. So I hear things like, which is much more helpful, is I can only do my best. So, I always say, I have this little saying, there's only one gold medal, there's one job, and you might not get it, and you might.
Yeah.
So actually, you can only do your best. So what are you learning by that? So
Okay.
I think it's about putting a positive but realistic spin. That interview that you didn't do great, fantastic. What did you learn by that? And it's again that you never know where that leads to. I've had job interviews, I didn't get the job, but then I got a call sometime later. We've got another position. We think you'd be better suited for this. And I also think that when we do get rejection, people make a story up about why we didn't get the job. And we might not have it might not be, we might have been, there might have been three people and any one of them could have got the job, but for whatever reason that, they've picked some other person. So sometimes in my coaching, we have to kind of demystify or debunk the story that you've made up. Because sometimes as well, I don't always think people get the feedback that they need from an interview.
Yeah.
We get kind feedback, but it might not be realistic, and sometimes that doesn't really help for the future. But so it's
Yes.
about keeping. I always say there's a job with your name on it, and if you believe that, you'll find it. So,
Yeah.
and I've been around the block quite a lot, so I kind of know from my own things that there is generally something for someone
No,
out there. So.
absolutely. And I think with the job searching from we've actually, of course, we won't mention names, but Denise and I have been working with a client between us, and Denise has been doing the coaching element. They've used the CV Guru for CVs, but we also introduced them to somebody that was relevant for him. And I think just been having that opportunity to think outside the box and speak to somebody that's maybe a little bit further on than you in their career to get that, expertise or just a different viewpoint can be quite refreshing as well, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with this particular individual, what was really interesting, so I think I'd had 2 or 3 sessions with him before I introduced him to you. And I think that what I saw that conversation do for him was all of a sudden he was able to identify someone similar to him that had made a shift. So he'd worked in the same industry for a very long time and he couldn't see that he had anything to bring out of that. So we'd been working on that. I also think what was really interesting is when we got to the bit about the transferable skills and you and your team were able to, it was like transformational. You put all his transferable skills down and he was able to look at a CV in a different way. It, it's so noticeable in his confidence when he came back for one of the sessions. I was like, who's this person? What's happened? So and it was it's all that it's a mix of that practical
Yeah.
and again that support. So I think also, it is about that. And I think you wrote a blog a few weeks ago, and I loved it because it was very much around this traditional going for a job, isn't there? So it's advertised on Indeed and you apply for it. But there's a whole other process that goes on around trying different opportunities, isn't there? Like who's in your network, who do you need to speak to?
Absolutely.
How are you getting out? Where are you being visible? What's your LinkedIn profile? So I always say there's like different little career little paths, aren't there, that we can create for ourselves. And a lot of jobs aren't advertised, are they? So
no, they're not. And I think that's what people can end up, what do they call it? Doom scrolling, where
yeah,
you're sitting on job boards. There's doom scrolling in many ways, but if you're looking for work, the doom scrolling is constantly refreshing the job boards link. The
yeah,
job will still be there tomorrow. And my way, I always say, take a few hours out of each day, do dedicate it to job searching, but then move on. If it's on a job board, it will still be there tomorrow. So don't feel
yeah.
you've got to react straight away. You're better giving yourself that time, and then your time to, you know, relax and reset a little bit. But no, Denise, this has been really, I think, really useful, hopefully, to everybody that has been watching the video. But what would be, you know, for somebody that's maybe just found out their role's at risk, or they have maybe just found out the news that their role has been made redundant, what would you say your biggest piece of advice would be for them to step forward?
Okay, so the biggest piece of advice is a question, really, and it's what's the plan? So I think that actually once you start with a plan, and I don't mean it has to have all those details, is actually what's the thing that I need to do next? What support do I need? And I think it's just take a breath as well. So actually what I know about is that actually whether it's come and work with a coach, take some time out to reflect, who might I need to speak to, just to kind of start, once we start to feel that we've got a plan, you know, and people know it. I'm going to update my CV, I better get on my LinkedIn, all that stuff. People know about it. If we get that captured, then we start to feel more in control, because what happens is when there's a rumbling on redundancy, people feel like they haven't got control. So it's the first thing is what's the plan will help you start to feel like you've got a little bit more control.
No, no, that's great. Thank you so much, Denise, for coming
Thank
on and
you.
sharing your expertise. And hopefully, a lot of people will, you know, feel a bit calmer after hearing what you've said.
Okay, thanks for
Okay.
asking, Emma.
No,
Okay,
thanks
bye.
so much. Speak soon. Bye.
Bye.